Erhard Milch was born on March 30, 1892, in Wilhelmshaven, a naval port city in northern Germany. He grew up in an environment shaped by the German Empire's strong military culture and its emphasis on discipline, hierarchy, and service to the state. His family background was complex and later controversial, particularly because of his Jewish ancestry on his father's side, a fact that would be concealed and politically managed during the Nazi period. As a young man, Milch was ambitious and intelligent, with a strong interest in technical subjects and organization. These traits would later play a major role in shaping his career and influence. Milch began his military life during the First World War, serving in the Imperial German Army. He initially worked in artillery units before transferring to aviation-related duties as Germany expanded its use of aircraft. During the war, he did not become a famous combat pilot, but he gained valuable experience in logistics, administration, and coordination. These skills proved more important to his later career than battlefield heroics. By the end of the war in 1918, Germany was defeated, its military dismantled, and many officers, including Milch, were forced to adapt to civilian life. After the war, Milch transitioned into civil aviation, a field that allowed Germany to quietly preserve aviation knowledge despite the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. He became involved with Deutsche Lufthansa, the national airline, which was officially civilian but closely linked to military planning and future rearmament. Milch rose quickly within the company and eventually became its managing director. In this role, he demonstrated a remarkable ability to organize large systems, manage personnel, and coordinate complex technical projects. He also developed close connections with political and military figures who would later form the core of the Nazi leadership. Milch joined the Nazi Party in the early 1930s and became an early supporter of Adolf Hitler. His political loyalty and administrative talent made him valuable to the new regime after it came to power in 1933. When Germany openly began rebuilding its armed forces, Milch was appointed to a senior position in the newly created Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. He worked closely with Hermann Göring, who was the commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe. While Göring was charismatic and politically powerful, he lacked technical knowledge and discipline, and Milch often acted as the practical organizer who turned broad visions into functioning systems. As State Secretary in the Reich Ministry of Aviation, Milch was responsible for the rapid expansion of Germany's aircraft industry. He oversaw production planning, factory construction, labor allocation, and coordination between designers and manufacturers. Under his supervision, Germany dramatically increased its output of military aircraft in the years leading up to the Second World War. Milch pushed for efficiency, standardization, and strict oversight, often clashing with aircraft designers and factory managers, whom he believed were inefficient or undisciplined. His management style was harsh, authoritarian, and demanding, but it produced results in the short term. When the Second World War began in 1939, Milch was one of the most powerful men in the Luftwaffe. He was promoted to Field Marshal in 1940, following Germany's early victories, including the defeat of France. At this stage, the Luftwaffe appeared to be a dominant force, and Milch was widely seen as a key architect of its strength. However, the limitations of German air power soon became clear during the Battle of Britain. The failure to defeat the Royal Air Force exposed deep problems in strategy, aircraft design, and leadership. Milch criticized Göring's decisions privately, but he remained loyal and continued to focus on increasing production rather than shaping operational strategy. As the war expanded, Milch's responsibilities grew even larger. He became Inspector General of the Luftwaffe and later took on the role of General Air Armaments Master. In these positions, he was responsible for ensuring that German aircraft production kept pace with the demands of a global war. This task became increasingly difficult as Allied bombing intensified and Germany faced shortages of raw materials, skilled labor, and fuel. Milch responded by pushing factories to work longer hours and by relying heavily on forced labor, including prisoners of war and concentration camp inmates. These policies increased production in some areas, but caused immense human suffering and reflected the moral bankruptcy of the regime he served. Milch's relationship with other Nazi leaders grew more strained as the war turned against Germany. He frequently clashed with Göring, whom he regarded as incompetent and self-indulgent. He also had tense interactions with Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments, who eventually gained greater control over war production. Although Milch remained influential, his power gradually declined as Hitler lost confidence in the Luftwaffe leadership and centralized authority around himself and a small circle of trusted advisors. Despite these setbacks, Milch continued to work relentlessly, believing that increased production could still change the course of the war. By 1944, Germany was clearly losing. Allied air superiority devastated German cities and industrial centers, undermining the very production system Milch had spent years building. His attempts to rationalize aircraft designs and focus on jet fighters came too late to have a decisive impact. Political infighting, unrealistic demands from Hitler, and the collapsing infrastructure made effective management nearly impossible. Milch's health deteriorated under the strain, and he was eventually sidelined from many of his responsibilities. In the final months of the war, he was captured by Allied forces. After the war, Milch was tried by a United States military tribunal in one of the subsequent Nuremberg trials. He was charged with war crimes related to the use of slave labor and the mistreatment of forced workers in the aircraft industry. The court found him guilty, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment, later reduced to a fixed term. During his imprisonment, Milch portrayed himself as a technocrat who had focused on production rather than ideology, but the evidence showed that he was deeply involved in the exploitation of forced labor and fully aware of the conditions under which people worked and died. Milch was released from prison in 1954, after serving several years. He lived quietly in West Germany, largely removed from public life and political influence. Unlike some former Nazi officials, he did not publish memoirs that shaped public debates, and he remained a relatively obscure figure outside specialist historical circles. He died on January 25, 1972, at the age of 79. Erhard Milch's life reflects the complex and troubling role of technocrats within the Nazi system. He was not primarily a battlefield commander or an ideological visionary, but an administrator whose skills helped sustain a brutal and aggressive war effort. His career shows how efficiency, organization, and technical expertise can be used in the service of destructive goals when separated from moral responsibility. While he was undeniably talented as a manager, his willingness to exploit human beings and support a criminal regime defines his historical legacy.